There is no place for happiness in this world, only pain and suffering. Many years have passed since she was released from prison, but she will remember it as if it were yesterday. When she came out and saw the light of day after so many years, the crowd was ready to tear her apart, throwing whatever they could find at her, calling her a sinner. Their eyes full of hatred and disgust pierced this girl, and their words full of poison congratulated her on her wedding. For her husband, she was just right with her sins. The dirt from the rotten fruit that the crowd threw at her flowed down the poor woman's face, and she, exhausted, remembered that she had to get married against her will. She knew only one thing, that she was a bad person, and that she could not have rights. Her hands were in shackles, like a witch's. The days full of hatred and suffering came to an end. A carriage was waiting for her that would take her to her husband. She was glad that she would leave this country and these evil people. And now someone mockingly shouted to her that the Beast King would love her and spoil her. The unfortunate girl began to realize whose wife she would become and where she would go now. A huge wolf-like creature will become her husband. Why should she bear this cross that belongs to someone who kills people? The heroine of this story was born and raised in the kingdom of Ford, where people lived. Opposite this kingdom, in the very heart of the forest, is the kingdom of animals, where monsters live. Beastmen have a wolf's head, a fierce look, and a mouth with sharp and huge teeth. They are much more terrible than ordinary animals in the forest. And the body is several times larger than a human's, and the limbs have sharp claws. After the global conflict that took place more than 10 years ago, a Cold War broke out between the kingdoms, and it was rumored that diplomatic relations had only just recently been restored. However, to this day, no one has tried to penetrate the animal kingdom. In general, people have tried to place warning signs everywhere. People were afraid of them because they devoured human flesh. They inspired horror in people. The head of the kingdom of Ford decided to marry a noble person of the country of Ford, and she is the only one who fits this title. Why would he need a sinner like her? Because the inhabitants of the kingdom of Ford were truly happy to get rid of their problems and were able to persuade the beast. The girl found it funny that she was dressed up as if she were in mourning. A little black hat, her hands in shackles. However, her heart was so hurt and heavy because of such injustice that tears involuntarily splashed from her green eyes. In fact, she is a princess, but only in title. From one prison she goes to another, which can be many times more terrible. Suddenly, the carriage braked sharply, so that the girl was shaken so painfully that she began to shake, after which they stopped. A voice on the street said that they had arrived. The soldier who was accompanying her jerked the door open and roughly grabbed the girl, telling her to get out, as if she were a thing. He freed her from the prison shackles and informed her that they had arrived at the kingdom, and also expressed his regret, but that she must go on her own. So the unfortunate girl was left alone in the forest at night. The carriage left in the blink of an eye. The girl stood up on shaking legs, wondering what to do and where to run, and began to peer into the darkness. A path was visible ahead, but further on everything was hidden by the night darkness, and all around were the terrible sounds of the night forest. The poor thing decided to go herself, not really knowing where. She just had to go somewhere. Her heart was jumping out of fear. After some time, footsteps were heard. The captive froze. Someone was standing behind her, and his heavy breathing could be heard. Shaking with horror, the girl turned her head, seeing a huge, enraged forest boar that was already accelerating towards her. The animal puffed loudly and ran faster and faster towards its victim. With cries full of pain and despair, our heroine staggered and fell to the ground. The last thought flashed through her voice. Would she really die here? Then she heard some kind of crackling and the wheezing of an animal. And then in the darkness, she saw a pool of blood. Someone's mouth was breathing heavily. You could see steam escaping from it, and huge teeth, showing white in the darkness. In mad agony, the girl stared at the one who stood there in the darkness. He was more terrible than the boar that had almost killed her. And then she saw a huge paw with long sharpened claws covered in blood. She would have been glad to run away, but her body was paralyzed with fear, and either sounds or groans were escaping. The creature in the dark robe with arrows on its back slowly licked the blood from its paw. And here, the shaking girl realized that there was a beast in front of her. He slowly turned to her and growled what the man was doing in these parts. Our heroine thought that she would lose her mind from fear. She was shaking as if in a fever. She could not answer anything. She just stared at the beastman with all her eyes. Now they will kill her. This is definitely her end. Then the beast roared and asked what the man was doing here. Barely mumbling with a slurred tongue, the former captive babbled that she was there at the invitation of the king of beasts, and that she was taken out of the carriage. Then her speech became confused, and he hissed to interrupt her conversation. Looking at the girl standing and trembling with horror, he said that people are stupid as always. He noted that he should have introduced himself earlier. After this, he turned to her completely and introduced himself as the King of Beasts, Alfred Vilcasis. And he added, looking at this girl sitting on her knees with her mouth open looking at him, that this was the name of her future husband. Her gaze slid over the corpse of a dead boar lying in blood. Fear weakened her so much that everything swam before her eyes. Our heroine began to lose consciousness and fall, and then she was enveloped in oblivion. The beast was very surprised. It seems she was trying to say something now, and now she is losing consciousness. While in a borderline state, thoughts came to her that the worst nightmare of her life had come true. They will become husband and wife. Consciousness refused to perceive reality. If this is a dream of oblivion, then it is better not to wake up. The beastmen were the worst thing that happened to her. Her entire home village was burned down. And now, one of them must become her husband. It is even harder to imagine what is more terrible, this or death. Someone said in a gentle voice that it was time for Sonia to wake up. It was so good. I vaguely saw the silhouette of my mother. The girl thought so vividly and wanted to ask her mother not to open the curtains like that, but her eyes did not want to open. Still, the bright light of the new day made her smile and sleepily rub her eyes. Her mother wakes her up again. The image of a burning village and a huge beast man appeared again, and a clear understanding that her mother was gone. She had been killed. The unhappy girl jumped up on the bed and swallowed her tears. Her body trembled, her hands clenched into fists. Taking a short breath, she still couldn't understand where she was. This was all some kind of dream. Lethargy rolled over her. Where was she? And then a wolf's face with glowing eyes appears in a cap and says, "Ah, there she is." She woke up. And again, the poor thing thought that she would give her soul to God. Her heart definitely couldn't take it. Her body grew back, and in front of her was a huge beast man. In agony, not understanding what was happening, she jumped up like a hunted victim and started to run. The beastman maid was surprised and asked to wait. Falling out of bed from paralyzing horror, our heroine grabbed the tablecloth on the table. The next second, she was already flying to the floor, along with the decanter of water. The glass shattered into pieces on the floor. She couldn't breathe. Sweat was pouring down. The girl's extreme state of shock was pressing on her. She tried to whisper that all this was not true. A huge wolf woman came up and giggled, baring her teeth. It seemed to her that the girl who had arrived had decided to play hide and seek. Our heroine began to understand that while she was unconscious, she was dragged into the castle. The beastman's maid calmly spoke at this time, calling the girl a respected wife, that the master would soon come, and she needed to be present at the meal with her husband. Sweat was still pouring down my face, and my husband's words were hard to comprehend. That's right, he is the king beast, and she must marry him. It's the same as becoming a concubine or a slave. Her temples began to pound, and she had only one thought: she needed to run. Having lost control over her mind, she began to run again. The strong, hairy hand of the maid intercepted her, which informed that the meal was on the other side and that there was no need to rush in such a hurry. Having brought the girl to the mirror, pale with dark circles under her eyes, the maid assessed the picture, saying that it would be difficult to eat in such a state. Our heroine was scrolling through the words, "Why is it difficult?" and couldn't take her eyes off the clawed paw and the sparkling long claws. Seeing the condition of the bride, the master's maid took out a dress and asked if she could change herself or if she needed help. With great difficulty pronouncing words with a numb tongue, the girl said that she could change her clothes herself. She nervously unbuttoned her blouse, exposing her breasts. The maid gasped at the sight of the girl's thinness. Having said that she needed more meat, she made the poor bride shake, for whom these words sounded like a hint that they wanted to eat her. The maid somehow pulled on the dress and buttoned it at the back. But this was not the end. Seeing that the girl was the color of the canvas, she decided to make the skin softer and add color to her face, after which she took some bottle and poured a viscous liquid into her paw. In general, many bottles and vials of cosmetics appeared on the table in front of the mirror, while the maid was applying powder and blush to improve her complexion. Our heroine was thinking only about what she was being cooked for. The Beast Woman muttered that the Beast King did not like bright makeup, but in this case, a little here, a little there was needed, and the poor bride, sweating, trembled, thinking that she was being prepared to be eaten. Her husband was waiting at a long table, which was set with cutlery. Seeing that his wife had been brought in, he glared with the flame of his violet eyes, assessing her. The Beast King was dressed in a uniform that emphasized his status, and his appearance showed that he had been waiting for too long, as he impatiently ran his claw across the glass. The standing girl saw only a terrible monster, which is called the King of Beasts. There was no one else at the table, but there were many empty plates, as if someone else was about to join. And all because, in the main menu, she herself, and then her husband growled for her to sit down. Alfred said that it was time to start the meal, and our heroine's gaze was fixed on a large plate on the table. They want to put her on this plate and then eat it. Seeing that the girl did not start eating, the Beast King asked why she was not eating. She sat in a complete stupor and could not answer anything. Then he growled at the servants to bring human food. And then the poor thing broke down, and losing control in complete horror, she rushed forward, screaming hysterically, begging not to be eaten. He narrowed his eyes as he looked at this shrilly screaming girl, who continued to beg him not to eat her. Then he asked to clarify the situation, so she decided that he was going to eat her. Unable to contain himself, Alfred laughed, shaking the room with a roar. The hunted girl looked at him with eyes widening in horror, thinking that he was angry. After this, her husband noticed that the table was large, and it was inconvenient to talk, and told her to sit closer. She doesn't remember how she got up and dragged herself along. Her body felt like cotton wool, and her head was so scared she couldn't think straight. After she sat down, she stared at one point and did not move, and Alfred ordered her portion to be brought and the main course to be served. The Beast King looked closely at his wife, who looked like a person who would die in a couple of minutes. She was running through one thought: the main course is her. His hoarse voice noticed that she looked as if her heart was about to stop. Looking sideways at her, Alfred realized that this poor thing still thought that she would be eaten. Approaching the bride, he said that they do not eat people. Only now did she look up at him, hunted, with a question mark in her eyes. The servants set the table. There was bread, appetizers, fried poultry, and a green salad. The girl never ceased to be amazed, as if she had seen something incredible. Seeing her confusion, Alfred stood up decisively. Approaching the fried bird, he began to cut it, saying that as far as he knew, people eat practically the same food as they do. She had nothing to say in response. He was right. Salad, soup, bread, all kinds of meat. His huge paw placed a plate of meat and side dish in front of her, which smelled very appetizing. He explained that they have a custom where the head of the family cuts and serves the food himself. Our heroine looked at him with the gaze of a surprised child, as if she refused to believe what she saw and heard. He asked her to start eating before it got cold, and the girl took a spoon and began eating the soup, carefully and hesitantly. Alfred was patient and waited for his future wife to begin. She slowly scooped up some soup with a spoon and began to bring it to her mouth. The girl's eyes sparkled. Her face expressed such sincere amazement, mixed with surprise, that she said what a delicious soup it was. Alfred looked at her with a searching gaze as she ate, as she sat. The girl was very tense. Her movements were uncertain and faltering. And in response to her comment, he simply said that the soup was like soup. Then, having grown a little bolder from such food and memories, she remembered that when she was in prison, she ate only hard bread and cold soup. He was shocked and only said, "So this is what people did to her." The Beast King was deep in thought, trying to comprehend something, and her words seemed to open something new in him. In anger at what his kind had done to this man, he clenched his fist, but held back so as not to frighten the girl even more. The servants professionally brought and took away the dishes, and finally tea was brought. What struck her most was that everything was really like people, which meant they really didn't eat human flesh. Alfred interrupted her thoughts by saying that it was time for her to take a bath. He made a gesture with his paw, with razor-sharp claws in her direction. And doubts came over him again. Maybe they were eating after all. And again, panic horror seized her. Everything inside turned cold. Her face clearly showed a pleading plea not to eat her. The words about the bathroom made her think that this was a preparation for her sacrifice as the main course. Her future husband noted that it was extremely important to maintain cleanliness. Shrinking and trembling from the horror she had experienced, our heroine followed the maid into the bathroom. As she walked slowly, she looked at the beastman with fear and uncertainty. Alfred sat calmly and serenely, with a noble look, and intelligently drank tea and looked at her. The girl understood that he was wearing clothes and was behaving calmly, but she also understood that he was a beast. This fear that he would suddenly pounce and tear me apart did not give me any peace. She also felt uncomfortable because of the servants who lined up to look at the master's bride and were talking to each other. She heard only the hum coming from the servants, who were saying something in fits and starts about the Beast King and about how the rumors weren't lying after all. The girl hunched over from these creatures. They were so huge and there were so many of them. Now she walked almost sobbing, thinking that this was her last chance to escape. Finally, the maid stopped in front of the door and opened it slightly, letting the girl go ahead. Instinctively, our heroine closed her eyes, as if she was about to see something so terrible. It was as if her fate was being decided behind this large door, and once she entered, she might never come out again. A bright light shone through her closed eyes, and she still squinted, opening one eye. The sight of the rich, bright, and beautiful bathroom made the girl gasp in admiration. Her eyes widened, her mouth dropped open from this magnificence. She had a stereotypical image of the bathroom as some kind of dark and scary closet, something like a cave. And she was also struck by the roses. Then the maid, bending down, said with love that yes, her master really loves roses. The girl asked again with curiosity. She couldn't believe that such a monster could love beautiful flowers. The maid said that the owner preferred the bags to be filled with flower petals, which were collected every morning. And then he enjoys their timid touches and rejoices in the unobtrusive smell. And again, some bad feeling came over me. The maid, in a sweet voice, suggested enjoying the procedure and not being shy. And when I heard that the Tsar prefers that even tea and sweets smell like roses, my suspicions grew stronger. What if it is cleaned for cooking? First it was painted, now it is a bath. The maid added rose petals to the hot bath and invited her master's wife to begin bathing. Seeing the girl trembling, she laughed and said that they grow flowers for beauty and not for food. She walked confidently towards the stunned girl to help her undress. Seeing that the new inhabitant of the palace was very constrained, she tried to make each new stage as pleasant as possible for her. This hunted man is afraid of every step and rustle, and now he looks at her with silent surprise. And our heroine kept going over everything in her head. Even though she was told that they don't eat people, she was still so uneasy. The maid turned to her again, calling her wife, inviting her to sit in the bath before the water cooled down. Deciding to make a joke, she made a face and said how they scare little children, which she didn't even finish. Our heroine rushed headlong towards the bathtub. When she stepped into the warm water with rose petals, an incredible feeling that she had never experienced before engulfed her entire body. Feeling genuine joy and surprise at such a simple thing as taking a bath, the girl scooped up water in her palms. Now her whole body relaxed. How pleasant it was. All the hardships of prison, fear seemed to dissolve in water. She gave in to the impulse and dove head first. It felt so strange, like she was in the animal kingdom. But the bliss did not last long. Again, a mad and all-consuming blow forced her to emerge. While frantically wringing out her hair, she heard that she was not alone in the room. Someone had entered. It was the king beast who came in, although the maid gasped, hinting to him not to come in yet. Our heroine didn't know what to do. He was here and looking at her. Black dots flashed before her eyes, and an inner voice said that he was waiting until he got hungry. As tactfully as possible, the maid said that it wasn't the best idea. The girl felt the towel with her hand. Her heart was jumping out of her chest. He was definitely approaching here. Covering herself with a towel, she stared at him in fear and shame. And Alfred calmly asked how she liked it, whether she was warm enough. His voice was calm. He tried to speak more softly. Everything will be fine, but he didn't have time to finish. Our heroine was already thinking about what to do. If she was caught by surprise, she jumped out of the bath so fast that Alfred was confused and at first did not understand at all what had happened. Seeing him flying, covering himself with a towel, he only managed to warn that the floor was slippery and that he shouldn't run like that. However, she did not hear anything, and to prevent something bad from happening, he intercepted her by grabbing her hand. Covering herself with one hand, the girl screamed shrilly to let her go. He let go of her hand. She could barely stand, shaking with horror. The Beast King at first did not understand what had frightened her so much, after which he bowed to his bride, who was mad with horror, and apologized, since they, the Beast Men, have fur, and they do not understand the features of the human body so well. Extending his clawed paw to her, he said that he was worried that she might freeze, so she should return to the bath. When the girl saw this huge paw and claws, she immediately remembered how the Beastman killed her mother. Even the sound of tearing flesh rang in my head, and tears welled up in my eyes. Alfred again didn't understand what was going on until he followed her gaze and looked at his paw. He asked a question. She was afraid of claws, but her look of a person ready to die was the best answer. The girl, helpless and bursting into tears, slid to the floor. Alfred tried to find out, as gently as possible. His claws were so frightening. He asked almost in a whisper, seeing her condition. And then she found the strength to say, mixed with tears, that her mother had been killed by a beastman with his claws. He looked closely at her tremors and eyes full of inhuman horror and pain, after which he calmly replied that everything was clear and took out a dagger. A sharp, honed silver blade flashed in his paw. Our heroine turned pale and thought that he had decided to kill her right here and now. The maid was also in deep shock at what her master was going to do. However, Alfred raised his dagger decisively. There was no doubt or hesitation in his actions. She stared wide-eyed at the beast standing above her. As his paw with the dagger rose up, she closed her eyes with a final silent prayer. No need. She curled up into a ball and realized that there was no way she could escape from here and prepared herself for the inevitable. He would stab her now. However, sitting with her eyes closed, she did not feel pain, while the maid herself could barely contain her hysteria looking at what her master had done. When the girl opened her eyes, she saw sharp claws falling one after another onto the floor. He calmly filed down all his claws with a blade. Holding her breath, our heroine did not take her eyes off what he was doing now. The maid understood what this girl meant to his master, smiled, and brought a robe to put on her. She told her that the owner decided to get rid of his claws as a tribute to her, his bride. The girl raised her head and asked why he did this. Claws are the pride of every animal. They are an indicator of status and greatness, and there can be no talk of price. As she said this, the maid looked at her paw and her claws, as if trying to put herself in her master's shoes and imagine his feelings. And our heroine tried to understand why the Beast King cut his claws if they were so significant. She dared to ask her question out loud, why if it was so important to them. The claws prove strength, but it seems that he did this so as not to harm her, as the maid explained. And again the silent question, do her fears really mean anything to him? And the consciousness once again reproduced the dead mother, cut by the claws of the beast man, stood before the eyes. And the maid, looking her in the eyes warmly, added that she was important to him. That's why he did it. Consciousness could not accept this reality, cut off the object of its pride, for the sake of it, man. She remembered the dagger, so did he really never want to kill her and even take such a step? Meanwhile, Alfred glanced sideways at his wife, once again putting the dagger behind his belt. Some feeling, together with a sense of guilt, took hold of her. Our heroine tried to get up and apologized. They stood opposite each other. Alfred calmly watched, as the girl wanted to add something else, but couldn't. She stuttered, holding out his paw with trimmed claws to her. He said, "So she's not afraid." His palm was open to her, waiting for her hand. Now a deep feeling of gratitude filled the girl. She looked at him with embarrassment, timidity, but the fear had subsided a little. She only tried to squeeze out that he was for her. She wanted to express gratitude and couldn't. His hand reached out to her head to stroke it. However, the fear of childhood and the horror she experienced came back to life again. She was little and screaming, and her mother was bloody and dead, with a cut back. And even though he now extends his clawless paw to her, she understands that she is afraid of the beastmen. But he is so careful, his paw almost touches her face. She does not move. When he tenderly and affectionately stroked her cheek, a warm feeling spread throughout her body, because except for her mother, no one had ever loved her in her early childhood. Now she was not at all afraid. His appearance, although animal-like, did not express aggression. His eyes glowed with warmth. He smiled and told her not to be afraid. Gently touching his bride, Alfred said that in time she would understand that there was no need to be afraid of them, and he would prove it to her. When he lowered his hand, she stood motionless, trying to get used to the new sensations. Then he also said softly that she shouldn't stand like that any longer, otherwise she might get sick. The girl now felt as if she was in a trance. She even forgot that all this time they were in the bathroom, where she had not finished bathing. She completely forgot about the towel that fell at her feet. Realizing what had just happened, she, embarrassed and ashamed, pulled on her robe and quickly ducked behind the curtain. Leaning towards her, he said with the same warm smile and calm voice that he was her husband, meaning why she was hiding. He tried to get closer to her, moving the curtain a little and repeating that she had nothing to be embarrassed about. Realizing that he was nearby, she again began to shake with horror, and she screamed at the top of her lungs, begging him not to come near her. The scream was as if he was attacking her. Even Alfred was scared by such a reaction. He mumbled in confusion that he had cut his claws and that their length was now normal. He couldn't understand why she was still shying away from him. Then the maid intervened. The woman said that it was time for them, the young people, to take a break. Approaching the owner, who was still confused by the lack of understanding, she suggested leaving the room by pushing him out the door. And she suggested to her wife that she get into the bath and finish bathing. The girl didn't need to be persuaded. He left, and she could breathe easy again. The maid advised me to dive into the bath, relax in the warm water, and not take everything on myself. And if it gets too hot, then let me know. There she is, already lying on the bed in her room, not believing that this day has come to an end. What a day! This morning she was still sitting in prison, not knowing how her fate would change in one day. Then I got scared when I found myself right in front of the beast man. And yet that day was, to some extent, a good one. Fatigue from stress and fears fell upon the poor bride so much that she forgot to cover herself and began to fall asleep. Consciousness gradually gave way to half sleep. She saw him, the king beast, how terrible he was, and then even cute, and the fact that he cut off his precious claws. Suddenly, the whole dream flew away, as if it had been taken away by hand. She jumped up in a shudder, cowering on the bed. It seemed like someone was in the room. She heard someone's footsteps, the clatter of feet, and remembered the servants whispering as she walked down the corridor. Fear once again enveloped consciousness like a web. So that's what they had in mind. After all, this is the castle of the Beastmen. It was very dark, but she heard that someone was standing right in front of the door. As if in a fever, the body began to shake. Consciousness was switched off. Fear penetrated every cell of the body. Suddenly, as soon as she entered the world of Beastmen and became a part of it, they came up with a plan. Everyone conspired. And soon, her fate will be decided. This is the quickest death. Perhaps they decided to kill her in her sleep, because it's easier that way. Yes, perhaps the maid and the master do not attack people, but there are still a lot of servants. They are so scary, whispering, exchanging glances. Thoughts started spinning in her head, where to run. It was dark everywhere, and nothing could be seen. The candles at her table were extinguished, another dead end, and she would have to go back, huddled into a ball, and shaking with horror. The girl prayed frantically, asking God to show her how to save herself. She had already gotten out of bed, not taking her eyes off the outline that was visible from the moonlight. Someone was definitely watching her, so she needed to run. So, crawling under the blanket and folding her hands in prayer, she reassured herself that nothing would happen to her today. Just as she was starting to fall asleep, a question arose in her head. What will happen tomorrow? No, it seems she won't fall asleep. In the morning, walking with the maid along the corridor of the palace, the girl listened to what was on the menu for breakfast today. It was milk and fish. She literally fell asleep on the go, hadn't slept for 5 days, and had no strength at all. The maid stopped and was frightened by the pale appearance of her master's wife. She noticed that she was very pale. Our heroine barely babbled that everything was fine and felt everything floating. The maid did not have time to catch her as she fell unconscious. Opening her eyes, she saw her husband holding her hand and sitting by the bed. He had a worried look, and he immediately asked her how she felt. Seeing him nearby, she jumped up and began to apologize hesitantly. But Alfred calmed her down. The main thing for him was that she was okay. Carefully placing her on the bed and covering her, he asked what happened, since he understood that there was a reason for the fainting. She shrank all over, not knowing how to tell about her fears, about the visions in her room, about the voices behind the door. He said very tenderly that she could tell him everything. She couldn't say anything clearly, except for one word. She was all tense and nervous, with obvious signs of lack of sleep. Alfred sighed heavily. He realized that she could not sleep normally, and the girl was afraid that he was angry. There were still some thoughts about escaping in her head. And then, looking at her huge beast husband, she thought that he would probably get angry if she ran away or got lost. To her complete surprise, he smiled and extended his paw to her and asked her to come with him. Of course, she was in doubt where, but after thinking a little, she extended her hand to him. Alfred walked ahead, along the long corridor of the palace, lighting the way ahead, and she trudged behind and was already beginning to feel scared. She was huddled from the cold and felt uneasy. And where were they going? It seemed like there was no end to the corridor, and a terrible guess came to mind, that he was taking her to a dungeon, to a prison like the one in Ford. Remembering how long she sat chained on the cold floor of the cell, he would probably throw her there if she tried to escape. Finally, Alfred stopped at some door, saying that they were there. When he opened the door and they entered, our heroine had never seen a nicer and cozier room in her life. The room was illuminated by the light from the crackling fireplace. A cozy chair, a bed, a carpet. It seemed like some kind of fairy tale room. The girl was so surprised by this beauty and comfort Apparently, this room had been lived in by someone. There was something magical and calming about it. The girl looked timidly at her husband and asked where they were. Alfred carefully led her to the bed and replied that it was in his secret room. Looking at her with a tender gaze, he mysteriously added that she was the first one to be here. Well, of course, besides himself. They walked for quite a long time through the corridors of the castle, and he usually comes straight from his bedroom. Still holding his hand, she looked at him with such fascination. She just wanted to ask why he brought her here, but her husband replied that no one would follow her here, and so maybe she will be able to sleep. She was embarrassed by this insight, which means he understood everything that was troubling her. But what amazed her even more was that he had done something for her that she tried to say in a fit of rage. He just asked her to go to sleep and get a good night's sleep until she felt better. In order not to embarrass her, he moved away, and the girl covered herself with a soft blanket. Sleep rolled over her like a veil. How good and cozy it was now. And yet there was a question she wanted to ask. Despite her shyness and fear, she decided to ask. Why isn't he going to throw her in jail? He's not afraid that she'll run away and get lost. He just smiled at such thoughts and replied that he didn't think about such things and that she needed to sleep. The morning light woke her up. The girl rose up in bed and stretched. How well she managed to sleep in this little room. After which, disturbing thoughts immediately came over me. And after all, this is his room. Alfred looked out from his chair, asking if she was awake, and he wished her good morning, smiling. Our heroine wished him good morning in return. And so, it was repeated for several nights in a row. She fell asleep in this cozy room, and he slept in the chair. One night, she waited until he was able to fall asleep and decided to get up quietly, carefully getting up from the bed as silently as possible. She felt the carpet with her bare feet. She certainly wouldn't mind sleeping a little longer. Now our heroine stood hesitantly over the sleeping Alfred, and just as she wanted to pass by, she almost screamed in fear. He suddenly grabbed her hand. He woke up and, holding her hand, asked why she wasn't sleeping. The girl explained haltingly that she had been sleeping in his bed all this time, but didn't want to think about it. But now, for several nights now, he was in the chair and she was in his place. Alfred protested. What was she talking about? He would never think badly of his wife just because she needed to sleep. And then, in a fit of emotion, she blurted out that she couldn't sleep on her master's bed all the time. Silence reigned. Alfred froze at first, not knowing how to understand her words. Afterwards, he felt annoyed that she called him sir, and the girl stood and shook, afraid that he would become upset and angry. Resigned, Alfred sighed and muttered. Apparently, she couldn't be changed. And again, he opened his paw and gave it to her. Then you need to do the following. Approaching the stunned girl, he affectionately and a little playfully hugged her, and affectionately took her by the lock of hair, then offering to sleep together. And again, her eyes full of shame, she blushed and screamed. Fear, misunderstanding, and confusion were reflected in the eyes of our heroine. Alfred looked at her intently, and again she wanted to say something, but she couldn't. She was afraid. She didn't know how to explain herself without making him angry. But to her surprise, her husband looked calm, although she always expected that now he would lose his temper and yell at her. Moreover, he smiled and still said softly that he was joking. And again, it really struck her that he reacted so calmly. He again gathered himself to sleep in the chair and said to go to bed. Sitting on the bed, she felt very awkward and ashamed. He was sleeping in the chair because of her. It was uncomfortable there, and she herself kept thinking why he said that. Covering herself with a blanket and closing her eyes to the crackling of logs and falling asleep, she kept thinking about what to do. In the morning, the girl decided to read one of the books in the library. The maid came up and asked if her husband wanted some tea, but she refused. Remembering the Beast King sleeping on the chair, she decided that it would be better for her not to appear in that room at all. Her attention was drawn to the twinkling light that came into the room, and she thought, looking out onto the street, unable to resist the temptation in the evening, she nevertheless made her way down the corridor into the room, pulled the handle, but the door was locked, and she told herself with relief that it was better this way. She was going to go to bed in her room, telling herself that she would not go into that secret room again. Covering herself and closing her eyes, our heroine told herself that everything would be fine, and she would be able to sleep peacefully here too. I tossed and turned, mentally ordering myself to sleep, but it was so empty, dark, and scary here. Most of the night had already passed, and she hadn't slept a wink, even though she tried to convince herself that everything would be fine. Even though she convinced herself that the beastmen wouldn't harm her, and she couldn't sleep at all, she ended up sitting at breakfast in the morning, pale and sleep-deprived. She was afraid that the Beast King would get angry when he saw her in such a state, but she saw that his chair was empty. I just wanted to ask the maid about Alfred, but she smiled and replied that her husband had asked me to tell him that urgent matters had arisen outside the castle. She felt strange having breakfast without him, but I thought that he was so busy that he didn't even have time to eat, and scooped up the soup with pleasure at how delicious it was. Our heroine was having breakfast alone, at a huge set table, and felt so small, unable to resist the urge to lie down on that bed in the secret room for at least a little while. She ran down the corridor and told herself that she wouldn't be there for long, and that he might not even notice that she was there. And now she is standing in front of the door, not daring to enter right away. The door was unlocked, and when she opened it, her eyes widened at what she saw. She saw a large bed for two, instead of the small one she slept on. The girl froze on the threshold. Alfred was sitting at his desk, sorting through papers, and without looking at her, said that she had come after all. After he glanced at her, as if studying her, she remained silent. Then, again burying his face in the letter, he casually asked if something had happened yesterday, since she was not here. Shyly and blushing, she muttered that she didn't want to embarrass him, because he also needed to rest. He stood up and slowly walked up to his wife, after which he asked her if she was so worried that he wouldn't be able to get enough sleep. Our heroine sincerely answered that he works so much, not finishing the sentence out of embarrassment, that it must be extremely uncomfortable for him to sleep in the chair. He looked lovingly at this girl who was worried about him. They stood there for a while, not knowing how or what to say next. Scratching the back of his head, Alfred said that he knew what to do. He said he knew she was afraid of the beastmen. Then he carefully and tenderly placed her palm in his paw and added that that was why he thought, if we make the bed bigger, she will feel more comfortable. Indeed, the previous bed would hardly have fit two people, but this one was so huge. Having foreseen her fears in advance, he calmly and kindly said that they could sleep together and they would both be comfortable. He would not do anything to her. The girl looked at him with wide eyes. He really had never harmed her. They lay down and turned away in different directions. It was somehow unusual to fall asleep. The bed was huge. She turned to see if Alfred was sleeping. Despite being busy, he did this for her. But he was a man-beast. She quietly sat up, thinking that he was sleeping. But Alfred was not sleeping. He heard everything. Sleep began to overcome her, and our heroine could not shake off the feeling of the unusualness of what was happening and why she felt so calm with him. She woke up in the morning, in his arms, at first not understanding what was happening. He hugged her tightly. One of his hands was on her head. The girl was perplexed by what was happening. Her legs felt his paws. They crossed. Raising her eyes, she saw his head. Alfred was still fast asleep and hugging her as if someone was going to kidnap her. She tried to comprehend in bewilderment how she had ended up in such a situation. And then the thought came to me why he was hugging her so tightly. He hugged her with both arms like a child, trying to free himself, but nothing worked. The girl listened and suddenly froze. She heard his heart beating, and it sounded just like a human one. It was strange. He was a beast man. All this time she was in his castle, and all she did was be afraid. The first few days passed in a complete frenzy of fear. How she didn't die is anyone's guess. But now, in his strong embrace, she is not afraid at all. A pleasant warmth spreads through her body, a feeling of security. These thoughts made the girl jump up, What was she even saying? His hand was so heavy that no matter how hard she tried to lift it, she couldn't free herself. Straining with all her strength, she pushed his hand away, surprised at how strong he was, and to her happiness, she finally managed to get out. However, this did not last long. With both hands, he again pressed her to himself even more tightly. It was impossible to move, and our heroine lay there and thought about what to do now. Suddenly, she smelled his body, and it dawned on her that only now did she understand what he smelled like. She relaxed. It became so warm, and again a feeling of security and warmth enveloped her like a veil. Turning towards him, she looked at the sleeping Alfred and felt the softness of his fur. She wanted to touch him so much. And her palm lay on his soft neck. The fur was very soft and silky, not at all prickly. With a new feeling of some kind of discovery, she realized that she was not mistaken. He was soft. Then she touched his throat, scratching it slightly, and he raised his head in his sleep, as if opening his neck for stroking. He stirred, and she thought she had woken him up. But Alfred continued to snore, and her hand reached out to him again. I wanted to go over my neck at least once more. I liked the feeling of soft wool so much. When she scratched him with her hand, he began to spit in his sleep. Our heroine understood for herself what it meant that he liked her and stared at his snores. She felt funny with emotion. He reminded her of a child being stroked or kissed, and she also thought about the dog, which usually makes similar sounds when it is petted. So what should it do now? She froze, studying him. Alfred stirred, apparently beginning to wake up, after which he yawned, revealing a huge mouth with sharp teeth. Our heroine stared at him in mute amazement, amazed by his fangs. And then she felt him turn over, and unable to hold on to the blanket, she felt herself flying out of bed. Alfred opened his eyes in surprise as he saw his wife roll out of bed. He still didn't fully understand what was going on, and jumped up asking her why she had fallen. A feeling of shame overcame the girl, and she asked to be forgiven. The king smiled slightly, as if he realized how she was studying him while he was sleeping. Looking at her tenderly, he extended his hand to her and suggested that they continue sleeping. It was still early. Red with shame for what she had done, the girl took his hand and climbed back onto the bed. With one hand, Alfred held his wife by the waist, and with the other he held her small hand. He looked at her lovingly, asking why she was nervous again. It seemed like everything was fine. He asked about it because of her, but the girl tried to simply apologize and drop the subject. He tenderly sat her down on his lap and said contentedly that he could now see that she had calmed down again. He instinctively felt her scent, and his nose was at her neck. And our heroine gave herself her word that she would sleep in her room tonight. It was as if lightning had struck her, and as she walked towards her, the girl did not understand why she was drawn to him like a magnet. After all, she needed to sleep at home. Remembering her behavior, she was horrified at herself that she had done such a thing, stroked him, and froze in his arms. Now her face was burning with shame, and if he hadn't slept, and if he had felt it, although he was so kind and warm, tenderness and gratitude for this spread through her soul. I remembered how affectionate he was with her, like with a child, patient and courteous. The girl, remembering these memories, again experienced those exciting feelings and pressed her hands to her beating heart. However, the voice that said what the king was thinking about made our heroine come to her senses and stop abruptly so as not to give herself away. She looked out from around the corner and saw two maids, one of whom was indignant that the king had married a man. The girl hid and realized that they were talking about her and decided to listen further. One of the servants was especially outraged that the king had taken a man as his wife. The second tried to calm her down. The second one still tried to calm her down, hinting that someone might hear them. But our heroine stood frozen against the wall, realizing that they apparently had no idea that she was here. The indignant maid trembled with indignation and almost broke the mop, declaring that she had had enough. In anger, she loudly barked that someday he would definitely eat her, and fell silent. But it was obvious that she meant that the owner would eat her. The second one called her colleague a fool, and our heroine thought that she would choke with horror. The body shook, as if in a chill. The head could not understand what they were talking about now. It began to dawn on her mind what the maid meant, that someday the Beast King would definitely eat her. And a terrifying picture appeared before her inner gaze. Trying to stop shaking so as not to give herself away, the poor thing thought about what she should do next. Her body went limp from fear, and she sat down against the wall. After all, they eat people, and the horror has come back to life. She can become its victim. Covering her mouth so as not to scream, she thought. But he told her that it was not so. One of the maids said that she would never believe that she was his wife. The other voice angrily replied that apparently he was so thirsty for her. And why would he need a person at all? The girl realized in horror that they were right. She was always the source of all the problems. Even her own tribesmen hated her. All her life, she received only abuse and beatings. Tears came to her eyes, and in the end, she would become his victim. While wringing out the rag, one replied, "Who knows, maybe the king will eat her. She's not doing anything." The girl, frozen in fear, understood that they meant that she was doing nothing, and the king expected her to be useful. The girl thought about her responsibilities. She really hadn't done anything during all this time. The maid's dialogue turned to the fact that people are rather lazy, and therefore she will sooner or later eat her, after which they laughed loudly. How scared our heroine was, this maid seemed to see her as a sworn enemy. Her grin was so terrible. They left laughing and already joking. But the girl couldn't move. She just sat, pressed against the wall. And again the fear of death breathed on her. She cannot allow this, but what should she do? Pale as a sheet, she understood that if she didn't start doing something, a sad end would await her. After breakfast, she made an attempt to be useful. Seeing the maid Hannah, who was cleaning and tidying up, she decided to ask her for work. The girl came up and asked if she could help with anything. The woman widened her eyes in surprise. Why should she help her? And in general, where has it been seen that with her status they would work? Our heroine didn't know what to answer to this. Gently embracing the girl, she asked her master's dear wife to sit down and relax. There was nothing to do but listen to Hannah, but her determination to survive did not leave her. The next attempt was in the garden. She tried to ask for help, sweeping or cleaning the street. But the maid cut her off, saying that it was her responsibility. The maid, who was busy with flowers in the house and decorating the interior, said that she was busy now without even listening to the master's wife. As a result, our heroine was advised to step into her room after her timid attempts. In the evening, she went to their secret bedroom, thinking about the past day, so much so that the maid even raised her voice at her, saying that she was disturbing her. The situation was dire. The servants would not help her. She stopped in front of the door, hesitant. She had only one thing left to do: talk to Alfred. But how would he react? When she knocked, he invited her in. He was sitting on the sofa and reading a book. He looked up from his book and noticed that she was late today. She stood before him, tensely, like a child in front of a parent, not knowing how to start a conversation about work. If she doesn't tell him directly, all she can do is come up with an escape plan. However, he couldn't get the words out, so he finally walked up to her, patted her on the head, and told her to come in quickly, because it was cold. He poured her hot tea, and taking the cup, she felt warmth. Alfred watched his timid wife with satisfaction. He liked to see her relaxed. For some time, they sat on the bed in silence and stillness, and drank tea. Suddenly she gasped, barely holding the cup and reaching out to him. He laughed and apologized. He was just joking. Pulling her towards him and looking into her eyes, he asked if everything was okay with her, realizing that she clearly wanted to say something. It was as if only now she remembered that she needed to talk about work, and it became terribly awkward. He studied her carefully, trying to figure out what was troubling his wife. When he asked what she wanted to talk about, since that was what she had come for, the girl again became tense as a string from tension. In the end, she bent over in front of the stunned Albert, bowing nervously and shouting that she was asking for a job. Staring at her intently, he asked why she was asking for a job, and our heroine thought that she asked for a job from everyone she met in the courtyard, but only he remained. And she said, raising her head, that when she was serving her sentence, she washed floors, did laundry, and was always busy. Although she did poorly at first, which made everyone angry, she started doing well after that. Albert didn't understand her at all and growled at her. Why does she need work? His appearance now seemed so scary to her. He asked why she should do this now, being his wife. The girl shrank and froze, trying to mumble something but seemed to go numb. She couldn't say that he would eat her if she wasn't useful. Tears welled up. Then he extended his paw to calm her down, gently pulling her towards him. He said that she was his wife. Just let her be with him. The girl thought about this word. And after all, she is the king's wife. Then came the logical question, what does the king's wife do? And the answer is that she gives birth to an heir. In other words, they will have a child. And in order to have a child, she imagined what needs to be done for this. Moving away and not expecting anything from herself, she screamed that no way. Then she realized what she had just done and hastened to apologize. It seemed that Alfred was not offended. He gently took her hand, fingering her thin fingers. His gaze looked at her confidently, and he replied that he would take care of her. Tears welled up from these words. Her heart sank. No one had ever said such words to her. Why is he so kind to her? And meanwhile, he playfully leaned over and muttered, "What if she tries to fall asleep holding his hand?" The girl, nervously embarrassed, tried to explain that she wasn't talking about that. Looking at her playfully, he explained that only she could cope with this difficult task. He held her hands in his. Warmth emanated from him. She felt awkward, and at the same time she felt so good with him. And yet Alfred wanted to know why she needed a job. He himself understood why she asked so suddenly. The girl wondered if she could tell him what she had overheard. He saw something that was tormenting her and not letting her speak out. He turned her face and looked into her eyes. She could trust him. All huddled up, she feverishly thought that she had to confess to him. She had to tell him, and then mentally asked for forgiveness. Trying to look carefree, our heroine laughed as best she could and explained that she was simply used to always doing something. Alfred looked at her attentively, without interrupting. Something told him that she was not finishing the sentence, and she continued to explain that she was always busy with something. He looked at her anyway, trying to get the truth out. She felt terribly embarrassed that she had lied. In the end, he smiled and replied that he understood her. The girl didn't even expect it to end like this, and thanked him in surprise. A sincere smile lit up her face. She was no longer tense, and said with all her heart that he was incredibly kind. Alfred, hearing this, froze, looking at her attentively. The candles burned, creating a pleasant coziness. The girl closed her eyes and happily thought about what kind of work she would be assigned. In an instant, she jumped up, not understanding whether the king had fallen asleep or not. When she tried to turn around and look, she saw him hanging over her and froze. Clearly not expecting to see him like this, she opened her eyes. Alfred looked at her tenderly, with inviting eyes. The thought flashed through her head that he was now trying to conceive a child. His hands took her hands, pressed to her chest. Our heroine closed her eyes at the thought of what would happen next, all tense, praying that it would not be what she thought. However, the room became dark as she had put out the candles, and the last logs in the fireplace were burning out. Opening her eyes in tension, she saw his paw near the candlesticks. Alfred asked her why, watching as she cowered and didn't move. Afterwards, he asked why she wasn't sleeping yet. He thought that she had already fallen asleep. Sweating from the tension, she thought that it was still too early to put out the candles. He wished her good night and sweet dreams, and said that he was going to sleep. The girl grabbed her burning cheeks, wondering what she was doing. Alfred thought in unison the same thing that he was doing now. They both felt extremely awkward and ashamed, and didn't know how to sleep now. As a result, she was unable to sleep and sat up in the morning feeling sluggish and sleep-deprived. Her hand automatically reached for the decanter. She decided that maybe the water would bring her to her senses. Albert's hand also reached for the decanter. They touched hands and pulled them away in embarrassment, blushing from embarrassment. To somehow diffuse the situation, he coughed to pull himself together, and to her greatest surprise, he told her to raise her head. Calling her by name Emilia, our heroine even forgot how her name sounds. And looking at her, addressing her as Amelia Lauren, he said that he was entrusting her with the work. The girl looked at him with wide eyes. For the first time during her stay in the castle, he called her by name. Standing up, he extended his hand to her and told her to come with him. They walked along the corridor of another wing of the castle, where Emilia had never been before. She was overcome with excitement. He walked ahead without saying anything, and, overcoming her shyness, she asked where they were going. But when they came out into the garden, she gasped. There were so many flowers in front of her, and such picturesque beauty stood there. Holding his hand, the girl was in a state of shock and delight. They walked along an alley with beautiful trees and flowers, and our heroine wondered why he brought her to such a wonderful place. As they passed by, they saw a maid watering flowers, and when she saw the king, she blushed and apologized. She humbly lowered her eyes to him and offered to help if needed. He walked arm in arm with his wife and thanked her for her help and said that it was not needed for now. But Amelia tensed up. It was the same maid who had been discussing her. This maid seemed so cold and scary to her. It was she who said that she would be eaten. Alfred noticed Amelia's tension at the sight of the maid and asked what was the matter, how she wanted to go faster. But she was absolutely sure that she would not go to this servant. It would be better for her not to leave the king. The maid growled from the anger that shook her. The master led this girl by the arm. She was already imagining how she would tear apart this hateful little man, because of whom she had lost the opportunity to become the king's wife. They came to a gazebo where it was light and there was a lot of greenery. Alfred said that this was the palace greenhouse, and that she could grow flowers there. The girl seemed unable to believe what she was hearing. Flowers. Could she really have been entrusted with this work? They stopped in front of bushes with soft pink roses, and the king replied that yes, now this is her job. Emilia remembered the time in her early childhood when her mother was alive. They also grew flowers. Happy, but very fragmentary memories came flooding back. He saw her face and asked if maybe she didn't want to. Realizing that this was her chance, she turned around and shouted with such fervor that she would not let him down and would try her best, that he was even scared. After that, he began to shake with laughter at the delight on this girl's face. Smiling at her, he declared that with such a hostess, the greenhouse would sparkle with new colors. His attention was drawn to the servant who addressed him. Alfred remembered something. He waved to Amelia and Hannah, instructing the maid to look after his wife while he had to leave on business. Amelia bowed and once again thanked him from the bottom of her heart for his work. Approaching her, Hannah told her that queens always took care of these flowers. The Tsar's mother loved the local flowers very much and took care of them. And then our heroine firmly and decisively declared to herself that she must keep this treasure. If she doesn't make an effort, it will be bad. Remembering what happens to those who are not useful, she decisively dumped the bag of earth. Hannah brought the sprouts, and seeing the scattered earth, asked how her husband was. The girl was very nervous. She wanted to help, not hinder Hannah, but she did not know what to do and where to start. Then the maid suggested taking the seedlings. Emilia told herself that she needed to be more attentive. She needed to pull herself together and complete the task well. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she told herself that she shouldn't cry and should get to work quickly. The girl straightened it out and added soil, deciding to plant new flowers here and make it beautiful. Suddenly, her gaze was drawn to the old buckets that stood piled on top of each other. She wondered why they put the old buckets so high. If they fell, Hannah could get hurt. At this time, Hannah called out to her, and the girl was distracted. At that moment, someone's paw pushed the piled buckets. Emily didn't immediately understand what was happening. Hannah was saying something, and she herself froze in a daze. Huge, heavy buckets were flying at her. Emilia was unable to move, horrified to think what they would do to her when they fell. All she managed to do was fall to the ground, face down, and cover her head with her hands. The roar was already approaching. Some time passed, and she thought why she wasn't in pain, and saw Alfred covering her above her. He asked tensely how she was seeing the girl's pale and frightened face. Emilia herself, pale as a sheet, stared at him, her tongue numb, and could only make some kind of sound. A frightened Hannah was already running towards them, shouting how the king and the king's wife were. Alfred replied that yes, and he himself looked sideways and listened, realizing that there was someone behind the buckets. Hannah sobbed and asked to be forgiven for not protecting her, but our heroine insisted that everything was fine. Although she was still scared, her consciousness only now realized that the king had covered her with himself and taken the full blow. He gently hugged her face, saying that the main thing was that she was not hurt. Seeing his hand, Emilia gasped. There was blood there. Alfred began to lick the wound like a dog, saying that it was nothing serious, just blood. Seeing this with shouts that this was not possible, Emilia made him freeze in surprise. He froze, staring at the wound in confusion, and she froze, looking at him. Emilia said that this was not possible. The wound needed to be treated, and if his health deteriorated. In a fit of rage, she put her hand on his face, so that Alfred became embarrassed and fell silent. They looked into each other's eyes for a while. It was a dialogue without words, which Hannah understood perfectly. When the maid said she would bring medicine, Emilia rushed with her. Alfred stood there looking completely confused, holding his hand on his cheek where her hand had been a few seconds ago. Having caught his breath from the tender feelings, he listened, catching a barely audible movement behind the barrels. He glared menacingly and growled that he had seen everything, or she thought he wouldn't notice her. The same maid jumped out and fell to her knees, trembling and trying to say incoherently that she was very sorry. She tried to come up with an excuse, bursting into tears, but he ordered her to remain silent. His appearance was frightening, and he made it clear that something like this should not be repeated. Otherwise, she would feel bad. And as he left, he thought, what if this is precisely why Emilia decided to work? Emilia continued to work with all her might. She planted the sprouts, watered the roses, and really hoped that nothing else would happen. 2 weeks later, he and Hannah admired the result. White, pink, and yellow flowers bloomed and delighted the eye. They rejoiced. Emilia thanked the kind servant for her help, and she claimed that all this was due to the king's wife. Then Hannah said that she was sure that the ruler would also be happy. Everything would be fine, but these roses did not bloom. On the contrary, they looked sickly. The girl was upset why they were so important to the king. And then she remembered his words, that these roses were used in the creation of the coat of arms. Emilia looked at these roses tensely, wondering what else she could try to do. When they were having lunch, he wanted to grab her for her work, but she interrupted him, saying that she needed to take care of the flowers. Alfred saw that she was upset, did not find her in the greenhouse, and in the evening she turned away without saying a word. The king sat down and thought, she's so strange, what could have happened? At that moment there was a knock on the door of the office, and he invited someone to come in. It was Hannah. The woman decided to start an important topic. Of course, it doesn't concern her, but the girl is already married, and she still hasn't changed her title. Hannah expressed her thoughts about the condition of the king's wife, who spent days and nights struggling over books on growing flowers. Hannah revealed that this is why the girl takes such active care of his roses. However, no matter what she did, it didn't bring results with the roses. They dried up. One day, Alfred came up to her and put his hand on her shoulder. Emilia turned pale when she saw him and barely babbled, "Tsar." The girl suddenly fell to her knees and fell at his feet, sobbing and asking him to forgive her. She was so sorry. It was all about the roses that didn't bloom, she explained, bursting into tears, that she had tried everything. Nothing helped. Then he gently took her in his arms. His face did not express anger or annoyance. On the contrary, he looked at her with love. After that, he carried her and put her on the horse. The servants were clearly alarmed by the king's plan, who shouted that they would be there soon. But for now, they would go for a horse ride. He sat Amelia in front, and he sat in the back. Our heroine was still excited, not understanding where they were going. When they got off their horse, they found themselves in the forest. The place was simply fabulous. The blue river and roses, like in the Tsar's greenhouse, were blooming in full bloom. The girl's mouth opened when she saw so many roses from the castle. Bending down, she examined the delicate, fragrant buds, admiring their beauty. Alfred told that these flowers have their own history. One day his ancestor got lost in the forest and was on the verge of death. Suddenly, a certain goddess gave him life in the form of rosebuds, and in gratitude for this, the ancestor created a coat of arms on which he placed these roses. Thus, this tradition was passed down from generation to generation. Emilia began to understand that if they collected water from this source, then their roses in the greenhouse would bloom. After that, they simultaneously jumped up and shouted that water would help. The girl offered to deliver this water to the castle. Then there would be enough for all the roses. Alfred fully supported her idea, praising her resourcefulness. And again that same feeling arose between them. When in a rush, holding hands, they felt embarrassment and at the same time incredible attraction. Magnetism attracted them. There was so much he wanted to say. He said her name. Now he called her only by name. They were interrupted by screams, and Emilia caught herself thinking that he had just taken her hands and hadn't asked her. And why is it that when she looks at the king, she is not afraid at all, and her heart beats in a special way? At this special moment, Hannah found them running to the gentleman. The woman understood everything and blushed with pleasure. She brought a blanket and a tea set, offering them some tea. Noticing that they had run away so quickly, her wife was apparently tired. Emilia jumped up, declaring that she was fine and that she would help her now. Alfred thought that she jumped up so quickly because she was still scared. Emilia took the blanket and began to spread it on the grass. And when she opened the suitcase, she was amazed by the beautiful tea set. A beautiful teapot, cups and saucers, a sugar bowl. Everything was quite large. Once again, it suddenly dawned on her and Alfred at the same time. And without saying a word, they filled their containers with water from the spring. Emilia was very glad that Hannah brought the tea set on time. Now there was enough water. She hugged the teapot, thinking that she could water the roses from it, imagining how they would bloom and how happy the king would be. She was overcome with happiness. The girl was so immersed in her dreams that she didn't notice how he was watching her. And as if a spark had pierced them again, they felt awkward. He stuttered a little and casually said that now there was enough water and they wouldn't have to carry it. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a cup breaking into pieces. Alfred and Emilia, struck by the sound, turned around sharply and in surprise. What she saw horrified Emilia. There were some masked bandits standing in the clearing, taking Hannah hostage and holding a knife to her throat. The one holding Hannah coldly said that they needed money, otherwise they would kill the old woman. Emilia screamed. Alfred was cold and cool-headed. Standing up, he covered Emilia with his body and glared at the bandits. His eyes lit up with a menacing fire. He began to approach them and bared his teeth, growling menacingly, asking if they realized that they had stepped onto the king's territory. His appearance clearly alerted the gang. The leader and his men looked at the hostage. Putting the knife harder, they ordered not to move, and, noticing Emilia, asked who this girl was. Alfred growled and made such a sound that the bandits trembled and froze. The king jumped up and roared in rage at them to let go of Hannah and everyone else. The bandits dropped everything they had, pushed Hannah, and started running. Emilia rushed towards the elderly maid, who was roughly thrown to the ground. When Emilia bent down to help the woman, she didn't notice how the masked bandit raised a knife over her. However, he didn't have time to do anything before Alfred hit him so hard that at first he didn't realize anything because of the piercing pain. Getting on all fours, he grabbed his stomach, and the king growled at how he dared raise his hand against Emilia. The furious look of the king did not indicate anything good for the criminal except a painful death. Alfred tied up the rest of the gang. Afterwards, they got into the carriage and went home, not forgetting to load the collected water. When they returned, he worriedly asked Emilia if she was okay. The girl apologized for overwhelming him with her problems. Alfred asked not to worry about it. Now it was necessary to try to revive the roses. He approached his favorite bush, and she decided to try to water it with water from the spring. She poured out the water from the teapot, really hoping that the healing water would help them. He watched her movements and was tense, although he tried not to show it, after which they felt constrained. Emilia muttered that she wouldn't have to go anywhere now. He nodded, and Alfred, watching the girl, mentally apologized, knowing that not so soon, but they will definitely blossom. Emilia thought that this would take time, and there would definitely be enough water. He agreed with her, smiling. It was nice to see how she was trying for the sake of the royal flowers. However, the roses began to bloom much earlier than they expected, and they became overwhelmed with excitement. Before their eyes, the white and pink buds began to fill and open. They stood there with expressions of admiration on their faces, and the sensations were simply incredible. Our heroine burst into tears of happiness and thanked the flowers for blooming. Alfred had one little secret that he didn't tell his wife. After all, these flowers had another name, Queen's Roses, because one of the conditions for becoming a queen is to make them bloom. She completed the task, and he gently hugged her face and turned her towards him. Alfred's eyes expressed gratitude, admiration, and love. His wife passed the test and now deservedly bore the status of queen. Her hands began to shake from awkwardness, and the girl dropped the sugar bowl. In an instant, with a deft movement, he caught it before it could break. What happened before, their eyes had a very strong impact on them. Seeing what she had just almost done, Emilia screamed to forgive her. The girl herself did not understand what was happening to her, why everything was falling out of her hands, and her heart was being torn out of her chest. He was in the same state, and in order to pull himself together, he coughed and said that the most important thing was that the roses had blossomed. His eyes shone with a playful gleam that held a secret, and he himself gave it away, all thanks to the fact that she used water from the source. She seemed to sense something because she looked at Alfred with wide eyes. Having thanked him for recognizing their work, they simply stood there for a while, tired but happy, because Emilia was truly happy that the roses had blossomed. One day, she was standing in the library, choosing another book to read, and overheard a conversation. The doctor spoke to Alfred about Hannah, who had injured her leg during the attack and was now at home. The girl shuddered at the memory of that day, when the poor woman got it badly. Emilia became truly attached to the kind maid, who was kind to her from the first day of her stay in the castle. She really wanted to do something for her, and so she plucked up her courage and approached Alfred. And now they are already riding in a carriage. Emilia is looking at the city, and she herself is in a costume that gives her the appearance of a human beast. In this big city lived Hannah and Emilia, and Alfred decided to visit her. It was our heroine's idea. Alfred agreed, but for safety, he dressed her in a costume with a sewn-on tail and a hood with ears. He carefully studied her in this suit and pronounced the verdict that she could now go into town. Finally, they arrived. Alfred saw that Emilia was all tense. When she got out of the carriage, she was overcome with heat. There were so many beastmen around, it seemed to her that everyone could see who she was. Seeing her fear, he, as always, supported her, confidently extended his hand, and assured her that everything would be fine. And she really felt calmer when he was around. Since he said so, the girl put her hand in his, and they went to Hannah's house. Hannah was very happy to see them, apologizing for causing them worry. The woman was as cheerful and full of energy as always, but she could not walk yet. But even this did not stop her. She shook her leg, and to Emilia's horror, declared that if necessary, she would get up and go. Alfred remembered that Amelia brought something to Hannah. The girl showed a bouquet of flowers and medicinal herbs. The woman happily accepted the gifts and thanked him for taking such care of her. And then she pulled the girl over and said, "What if the king and his wife go into the city and look at the fireworks? Because today is a holiday." Without giving them a chance to respond, she was delighted with her idea and said that it was a wonderful opportunity to relax. There were flags hanging in the city, and there were a lot of beastmen. Everyone came to the celebration.
Alfred held Amelia's hand tightly as she trotted after him. However, even with him, she felt uneasy seeing these predatory faces.
She pulled her hood up and tried to hide her face so that she wouldn't be discovered. Feeling her panic, he squeezed her hand tighter, placed the other on her shoulder, and reassuringly reminded her that he was nearby. And again that feeling of security, gratitude, and something so warm and tender overwhelmed her. One of the merchants called out to them, shouting that he had something for them.
He sold jewelry, different ones with beautiful stones. Alfred wanted to please her, but Amelia refused such gifts.
Afterwards, they approached the trays with huge fruits and vegetables, some of which our heroine saw for the first time, and was amazed by their shapes and sizes. Then they approached a counter with various flower seeds. Emilia was very happy with this gift and happily thanked the king. She felt guilty that she had put pressure on him and dragged him into the city, although of course she wanted to, but he still went for her sake. Alfred couldn't take his eyes off her excited but happy face, and she suggested going into town to see the fireworks. It was already sunset, and he replied that it was a great idea. It seems she is dissolving in this feeling. She was overwhelmed with happiness. She was able to pass on the medicinal herbs to Hannah, and she also called the king by name for the first time today. But she just wondered what to do with him. 30 minutes ago, she and Alfred were standing waiting for the fireworks when she saw a crying child. She pulled her hand away and ran up to grab the child in her arms. Although she thought that she had let go of his hand, maybe she shouldn't have done that. Although on the other hand, the child is also scared. You can't abandon him. And the baby was pointing somewhere with his finger. His mother stood there, bowing low to Amelia for finding and bringing the child. When the woman began to apologize for not keeping an eye on her son, Emilia nervously reassured him that everything was fine. The main thing was that the child was found. At that moment, a beastman of a clearly unfriendly appearance approached and barked, "Here they are." The woman saw him and smiled, wanting to explain what had happened. He looked at Amelia, with whom they had passed each other. He looked for his son, then asked the stranger why she had run away. Emilia was beside herself with fear. If only he wouldn't understand who she was. And this beastman looked at her suspiciously. As a result, everything got mixed up in her fear, and she started running at the moment when he blocked her path. Alfred walked through the crowd nervously because he couldn't find Amelia anywhere, and the more time passed, the more the anxiety grew. His hearing was strained. In the crowd, he heard a conversation that there was a man who had made his way into the city. He bared his teeth. Fear washed over him. What if something happens to her? What if he doesn't find her? When the beastman, the baby's father, stopped her, he increasingly suspected that something was wrong with her, that this was a human. The child, seeing his father's actions, began to cry. He didn't want to let the stranger go, but his son also began to bawl louder and louder, bursting into tears. His wife did not understand what he wanted from the one who found their son, and shamed her husband for the child crying. By the time the discouraged father turned around, there was no one left in the place where the stranger had stood. Emilia, not looking where she was going, ran trembling with fear, crashing into the crowd, which involuntarily attracted attention to herself. Finally, she managed to run into a dark corner and catch her breath. What happened? She was sure that she would just visit Hannah and have fun here with the king. She thought that everything would be fine, but now it hurt so much.
Her legs ached from the chafed wounds, but the girl tried to bring herself back to normal. If she didn't screw up, then everything would be fine. The main thing now was to find the king.
Pulling the hood over her face as tightly as possible, she walked closer to the fireworks. since they had agreed to watch them, and he probably went there too. But when she heard what someone said, she was horrified. Someone said that he heard that they smelled a human scent here. They talked about her, and the other one answered that it was all because they were frying human flesh here. It would be extremely reckless for a human to come here. This is the kingdom of beastmen. And they also said that the king would probably be disappointed to learn about her. And it pricked her inside, exactly, because only those around her call her queen. In reality, she has no status. Tears filled her eyes. It was all because of her. She had caused everyone problems again. The king would be angry. At this time, almost next to her, everyone started talking more and more animatedly. There was a person here, and he needed to be found. They sensed her by smell, and our heroine started to run. If she was caught, it would not end well. As she made her way, she thought only about how to find the king. He was very close, also with the thought of finding Amelia. Alfred imagined what it was like for her there. She was already scared, and now she found herself in such a crowd, all alone. Suddenly, a familiar voice reached her ears calling her name. It was him, Alfred. Amelia shouted back to the king, but there was a loud roar from the crowd, and behind her ran that same child, who had obviously run away from his mother again after her. But the baby tripped and fell face down. The girl saw that same child, and forgetting about everything, made her way through the crowd again.